Good evening and welcome to the third in a series of political forums with candidates for office for November 2nd. It is being brought to you by Cayuga Community College as well as The Citizen. These are shown on Spectrum, Verizon Fios, ARMA, the Auburn Regional Media Access, and played on the college's radio station, Win 89. I'm your moderator, Guy Cosentino. On November 2nd, the voters in Cayuga County's 7th Legislative District will go to the polls to pick a member of the county legislature, with current incumbent Keith Batman, a Democrat who's also on the Working Families line, is seeking re-election, and he is running against Robert Shea, who is on the Republican and Independent lines. The 7th District in Cayuga County for the legislature includes the towns of Ledyard, Scipio, and Springport. The position of a member of the county legislature is part-time and has a base pay of $13,500 a year. The 15-member legislature has 6 Democrats, 5 Republicans, 1 conservative, and 3 non-affiliated members at this time, with half of the legislature up this year. So with several incumbents, I believe 4 of them not running for re-election, control could change in January depending on these elections this November. Representing the press today is a familiar face, even though he is online today. It is Jeremy Boyer, the executive editor of The Citizen. He'll be asking the questions of the candidates. As with the pandemic and worldwide rules regarding COVID-19, we are enforcing several safety procedures here. That is that while both our candidates are in the studio, we have limited the number of individuals in the studio, with everyone being masked. But candidates, as long as they are 6 feet apart, once they are seated, can take off their masks. And they have done so for this forum. Prior to the taping, they did draw of lots to see who would go first in making their opening statements, and then reversing that order at the end of the forum, which will run roughly an hour. So we're delighted to have both legislator Keith Batman, who's on the Democratic and Working Families line, and Robert Shea, who's on the Republican and Independent lines, in the studio. Gentlemen, welcome to this forum. We'll start with 2-minute opening statements. We'll turn over to Mr. Batman. As you know, we have a student here, Ethan, who will be timing everyone. He'll hold up a sign at 1.5 minutes, and then at 2, we'll ask you to finish your thought, as we'll say. So with that, we'll turn to Keith Batman, who's on the Democratic and Working Families lines. Mr. Batman.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm pleased to be here today and pleased to share my record of service to our community and why I urge the voters in District 7 to return me for another term. I have a 50-year record working in and for our community. I've served on dozens of community boards and was elected several times to the Southern Cayuga School Board and served 3 terms as supervisor in the town of Scipio. And I'm currently completing my 8 years on the Cayuga County Legislature. I've negotiated contracts on both sides of the table, labor and management. I've prepared budgets for the county and other organizations with an understanding that money should never be wasted, but that we must spend money in order to meet the needs of the communities we serve. I've been chair of the legislature, minority leader, majority leader, and chair of many of the committees, both ad hoc and standing. And I've served as president, treasurer, and secretary for many not-for-profit organizations. I've worked in a county government department and in higher education as faculty and dean. But before returning to college as an adult, I also worked as a dishwasher, house painter, labor, janitor, and factory worker on an assembly line making televisions. I know the meaning of hard work, and I work hard at my position. I'm a husband, a father, a grandfather, an uncle with a deep appreciation and commitment to family. My upbringing and my experiences have taught me that service to the community is paramount. And if you want to serve the community well as an elected official, you must know your community and be actively involved. And my involvement runs deep in this community. The job of the legislator has a local focus, where it's not a venue to discuss state or national issues. We focus on the everyday operations of the county and how it works for its citizens. Our job is about issues like roads, bridges, culverts, high-speed internet, protecting our lakes and watersheds, and fiscal responsibility to keep taxes as low as possible while providing the necessary services. I have a proven record and a proven experience, and I look forward to serving another term. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Batman. We'll now hear from Robert Shea, who's on the Republican and Independent lines. Mr. Shea, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Good afternoon. My name is Bob Shea. I'm a 15-year resident in Union Springs. I'm a proud alumni of Cayuga Community College. I am currently retired. I've worked before at Lowe's as a commercial sales specialist as well as Home Depot. I opened the Home Depot here in Auburn many years ago. I've also been involved with it being a construction superintendent, which makes hard decisions on building buildings to code and the proper specifications. I've been on the Tully Town Board before for 2.5 years. I had to give up my position because my employment took me out of state. I've been on the library board in Tully as well. The Southern Hills Preservation Corporation Board, it's a nonprofit housing agency, as well as a senior housing committee member to get senior housing in the local Tully area. I've also coached. Some of the best years of my life have been coaching my girls in softball and in basketball. My concerns for the area are business growth, which we need desperately. Also, the algae blooms in Cayuga Lake have a concern of mine. Also, growing big government is something that we can't afford at this time. And taxes going up 2% every year are a concern of mine. I'd like to give my efforts as, a fighter for the Cayuga County voters, and hopefully I can bring change to the Cayuga County government.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now hear from Mr. Boyer. He can ask questions of either of you or both of you. If it's both of you, we'll rotate the 2-minute responses. As I indicated before, that if one of you wants to follow up after your opponent has spoken and you've already spoken on the area issue, just give me an idea and we'll give you another additional minute and we'll go back and forth on those. The other issue is that if there's a question for you specifically, you have 2 minutes to answer that. We are going to allow your opponent 1 minute to follow up and you will get a minute at the end of that. Mr. Boyer, welcome.
Thank you, and thanks to you for organizing these debates and to the candidates for participating. And I'd like to start with tonight's debate, asking you a few questions about water quality because especially in this district, water quality is really paramount to voters and residents in Cayuga County. And this district touches both the shores of Cayuga Lake and Owasco Lake, which are two major water sources, drinking water sources in our area. So the first question I'd like to put to you, it deals with Owasco Lake and the watershed. The Owasco Lake watershed rules and regulations revisions were worked on for several years and approved last fall, about a year ago, by the town of Owasco and the city of Auburn governments who are responsible as purveyors of the lake that draw water to supply the customers downstream. And for a year now, we've been waiting for the state to give its answer as to whether the State Department of Health, as to whether they will approve those revisions or not. So with these revisions, there are more stringent rules for land use, including for farms. So with this matter still kind of pending, I'd like to know, each of you, what's your position on whether the state should approve these revisions as they were submitted, and explain your thinking on why or why not.
Okay. Legislator, you'll have 2 minutes on this, and then Mr. Shea will have 2 minutes on this.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, good question. Thank you very much for asking it. I'm very familiar with the watershed rule and regulation process. One of the things that I actually am proud of accomplishing is when I was chair of the legislature in 16 and 17, we had the harmful algae blooms in Owasco Lake. We were able to solve that problem with the installation of filters with the help of the state, Owasco, and Auburn. And later, of course, as you know, we were able to do the same for Aurora for that water. What the reason that's so important is from that was actually a major impetus for reviewing the watershed rules and regulations. And one of the things that I'm pleased about doing is that the Planning Department and Health Department came to me as chair and said, we need to look at these. They haven't been looked at for years. It's the responsibility of whomever uses water, draws water. So it's Auburn and Owasco's responsibility. But they wanted the county to get involved. So I sent a letter to Auburn and Owasco saying that we would be happy to staff any effort if they wanted to move forward, and of course they did. At this point, those watershed rules and regulations are done. They're in the hands of the health department. They will be reviewed by the health department, Ag, DEC, and some others. And yes, I'm fully 100% supportive of them, and they need to get done and get done soon. They've had them long enough. In fact, I'm president of the Board of Health, and we sent a letter about a month ago to the state health department saying it's been long enough. You need to get off, you need to review these, you need to approve them, and you need to get them back to us. They will make a difference for the quality of the lake and for the watershed, and they need to be done and done as soon as they can be.
Thank you. Mr. Shea, this issue of the Owasco Lake watershed rules.
I'm at a disadvantage here because I don't have intimate knowledge about the watershed rules and regulations. However, I only know that there's still algae blooms in Cayuga Lake. I don't know about Owasco Lake, and it concerns me. I believe that we can't use our beaches along Cayuga Lake, and we need to do more. I still see we can't use the beaches, so it's a concern of mine, and I don't think perhaps we've gone far enough as far as addressing these issues.
Thank you. Mr. Batman, you'll have 1 minute.
Yeah, I just want to agree. I'm glad to hear you say that. I think it is an issue. And of course, the reason to update these watershed rules and regulations is to put in place the additional protections so that we can have more of an impact on the algae blooms and other water degradation. So yeah, I think it's important that we move forward with them, and it's important that we monitor the results.
Okay, Mr. Boyer.
And let's go over to the other side of the district now with Cayuga Lake. Mr. Shea, you alluded to the blooms that are happening, the harmful algal blooms that are happening there. And one issue that's happened with Cayuga Lake in the past year was a major farm manure spill that ended up leading to a $100,000 fine by the state DEC against the farm, which this was not the first offense for that farm. With the issue of agriculture and its contributions and potential issues with water quality in Cayuga Lake, my question to both of you is, does there need to be increased enforcement and stiffer penalties for these kinds of violations?
Mr. Shea, you'll get 2 minutes on this, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Batman.
I did read about that incident earlier this year, and I think the DEC has appropriately fined the parties involved, and I don't think it's a huge occurrence or a concern, but it is a concern nonetheless, and monitoring is a good thing. I think farmers in our area, we're a huge farming area, I think they've got a pretty good handle on as far as injecting the chemicals they need to inject from their farms. And I think, I think the fine was justified. And, as long as they're monitoring that and finding those infractions, I think it's a good start.
Thank you. Legislator, you'll have 2 minutes on this subject as well.
Okay, thank you very much. This is another reason that the Cayuga Lake or the Owasco Lake watershed rules and regulations are so important. The state is watching, other watersheds are watching what happens with these. These will be the first new watershed rules and regulations in, 30 or 40 years. And other people are watching to see what happens. As is Cayuga Lake. To answer the question directly, I think there needs to be more enforcement. There needs to be, people need to pay, DEC needs to pay more attention, and fines need to be levied. This $100 fine is the first fine of that size in any of our watersheds. Generally speaking, the fines are much smaller, and this was such an egregious thing that DC did decide to fine more seriously. But keep in mind that these infractions are after the fact. If bad things go into our lakes, it's good to fine, to say don't do it, but it's better to stop it. And so what we need to do is double down on practices, the best management practices, for farms and for others, because we're all guilty to some extent of polluting our lakes. We all need to double down and be more conscious of that. with that consciousness, hopefully, we will improve the quality of Cayuga, Wasco, and our other Finger Lakes.
Mr. Boyer.
And the final water-related question that I had was the Cayuga County Sewer and Water District has been working on studying and really, I think they're moving pretty far forward on a project to establish a new water intake and treatment facility out of Cayuga Lake. The idea of getting a second major source of water for much of the county in place and creating more of a regional water authority. What's your thoughts on the wisdom of that kind of plan moving forward? Is that a good idea to be doing or not?
And Legislature, you get to go first on the second draw issue.
Okay. The issue with that is with that project is two. One is it's going to provide economic development opportunities for the southern part of the county, which are greatly needed and will be greatly welcomed. The second thing is, as you've mentioned, Mr. Boyer, is to provide redundancy for the water source in Auburn. I come back to the HAB problem we had in 16 to 17. At that point, we were within this close to having to truck in water. Now, that problem is solved, but we don't know what the next problem is. So redundant source of water for both people that use Cayuga Lake and that use Owasco Lake, I think, is good insurance. Having said that, the thing I like about this project is I will not have a say. I live in Scipio, and Scipio is not part of this proposed district. What will happen, and the legislature will make sure this happens, once the plan is done, we will make sure that it goes to a public vote, and those people that will be affected, those people that will pay, those people that will benefit will make a decision of whether to move forward with it. So my personal feeling is my personal feeling. My public feeling is yes, we need to take it so that the people that will be impacted have a decision, have a vote. That's what democracy is.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shea, on this issue of the second draw source in Cayuga County.
I think it's a good idea. It's a positive idea for Cayuga County and the demands that it is from on Owasco Lake. However, I still have concerns about the algae blooms not being solved, and again, too much phosphorus. We need to look into that further and find out if we are going to draw clean water and what the impacts of that are. I think it's a good idea to put it before the voters, those involved, to say they're prepared to pay more in pet taxes, or are they just want to bypass that for future expansion.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
All right. Move on to another question that really has a lot of resonance, I believe, for residents in this particular district, and that's the relationships that local governments have with the Cayuga Nation. I know. I believe it was I'm now mixing my meetings up, but I think it was I think it might have been the August meeting where a representative of the Cayuga Nation Traditional Council asked the county legislature to stop recognizing Clint Halftown, the longtime federal representative, as the true leader of the nation. And certainly the Cayuga Nation has a lot of property, and they operate businesses and have a lot of activities in your district. So my question is to that request and that issue of whether Cayuga County and local governments should be working with and recognizing Clint Halftown as the representative of the nation in dealing with local government.
Okay, I believe this goes to Mr. Shea first, this issue of recognizing Clint Halftown.
Yeah, I believe that responsibility is for the Department of the Interior to deal with the nation. It puts Cayuga County in a precarious position to take sides. I think we should let the nation work its issues out itself. And, I know the property, they don't pay taxes, but they get services. So it's it's a concern. I think we should be very careful going down this path. Again, because you know, it puts Cayuga County in a very awkward position.
Legislator, this issue of recognizing Mr. Halftown.
Yeah, and the first thing I want to clarify, there are two people that spoke at the legislative meeting. One of them is a non-native, a non-Cayuga, who spoke on exactly the issue you mentioned. The other person is a Cayugan, member of the Cayuga Nation, but was not speaking as a representative of the nation, but rather just as an individual, and that's an important distinction. The issue with Halftown and what's called the group often called the traditionalist is one that goes back at least 30 years. They have not been able to resolve it, and they still can't resolve it. They're still at odds. What the Department of Interior and the BIA has done is they've said, look, we don't know who is the leader of your nation. That's not for us to decide. What we know is we administer lots of federal funds, and we have to have someone to deal with. And they chose Clint Halftown. My understanding is that recently there's been yet another move to ask the BIA to change that and to represent the other group. Where that goes, we don't know. The difficulty that Cayuga County faces is actually what Mr. Shea pointed out, and that is that leadership in the Cayuga Indian Nation is an issue for the Cayuga Indian Nation. For us to take sides in that places us in a very difficult position. My position, my thought on that up to this point is I'm chair of the Cayuga Indian Nation, the legislative ad hoc group, which is composed of some legislators and some representatives of District 7 and the District 5 as well. And my position and our group's position is we'll talk with anyone at any time. And so that we continue those conversations. But until there's some resolution of leadership in the nation, it's difficult for us to do much of anything, frankly.
Okay, Mr. Boyer.
Okay, a few questions related to COVID-19 and the various impacts of that. The one I'd like to start with is the funding that Cayuga County is receiving from the federal government to help deal with some of the effects of the pandemic. The county has more than $10 million. I know that the last meeting there was a presentation of a long list of suggestions from county department heads on ways that the money could be spent. The legislature ultimately will have to be making some decisions to prioritize where the money should go. So as two people that are looking to be part of that conversation into 2022, I'd like to ask your thoughts. What do you think are the best ways for Cayuga County to spend its federal COVID-19 relief funding?
Okay, and I think we start with Legislator Batman on this one first.
Yeah, I smiled when you asked the question because it's an incredible windfall for us. With $14 million over 2 years directly paid to the county is something we just don't often get from the federal government. In fact, I don't think we've ever gotten it from the federal government. So it is an opportunity and it's a challenge. I do not have an opinion about specifics at this point because I think it's important that we collect all of the specifics, we talk about them, we look at them, and we make then a decision. I do have some guidelines that I use and I will use, and those guidelines are these. First, we should not spend any of that money on anything that supports the operating budget. This is one-time money. It will not be repeated. So we need to be careful not to dig ourselves into a long-standing budget hole. Secondly, we should not spend that money on anything that has recurring cost of any significance because, again, if we spend the money now on some project or more staff or something of that nature that we have to pay for next year and year after, we have not accomplished much. Third, it should be something that benefits beyond county government. We need to use this money at least in significant amount for projects that will benefit the larger community in a very direct way, in a way that we need to be able to articulate. If there's a project that we cannot say, here is why this is an important project, here is how it's going to help the community, then I won't support it.
Okay, thank you, Legislator. Mr. Shea, how would you spend the $10 million?
Well, there's never a lack of wish lists and when it comes to incoming money, so that's for sure. But I think it's something that has to be talked about in the legislature because the Cayuga County is very unique. We have very rural areas that have needs, and we have the Auburn that has needs as well. So it's a conversation that we need to have, and again, review those wish lists. How are we going to divide the money? Where it is best spent. It is the people's money, and it should go back to something that affects them directly. Whether we do infrastructure or whether we do, projects rurally is something that really need to get into.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
To follow up on that, there was a portion of that money has already been, I guess it hasn't been spent, but it's already been committed by the legislature over the summer. There was a vote to approve using $1 million towards major renovation improvements at Emerson Park, and then smaller amounts to support the Cayuga County Health Department's ongoing efforts to deal with the pandemic, and then another part was used for a restaurant voucher program that provided some direct funding to restaurants who have been hurt through this. What are your thoughts on those three uses that were already committed? Were they all? How did you feel about each of those?
And that's for both candidates?
Yeah, I mean, I assume Mr. Batman, I think he voted yes on all of them, so I imagine he supported that, but he can certainly explain why he voted yes.
We're going to start with Mr. Shea, though, first. It's his turn to take the first question.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, Emerson Park, I was there recently. It could use some improvements. There's also many more projects. The restaurant deal was very very positive for the community, and I think the list of projects needs to be reviewed. I mean, it's a good start. It's $14 million. We should try to spend that wisely, and see what other projects are in the pipeline. And
Thank you. Mr. Batman, would you talk about what you may or may not have voted for and why?
I hope I know what I voted for. It's always bad when you say, I don't remember that vote. Yeah, I did vote for it. I do support it, and I support it for some specific reasons. First is the Emerson Park project. Putting $1 million in that project is an attempt to leverage $10 million in other investment. And if you read the resolution, part of that resolution says that if we don't get the other 10 million, we're going to revisit the million. So that's something that you put in $1 and you get $10 back. It's a great investment. We got to also remember, in the context of the park, tourism and agriculture are the two biggest industries in Cayuga County. Emerson Park is a major tourist draw, so to invest there makes a lot of sense. The restaurant voucher program was a great boost to restaurants which were hit very hard by the COVID, the pandemic. So it made a lot of sense, and we may do that again. That was only $100,000, which from my pocket is a lot, but when you're talking about the millions that we have to work with here is not significant. And then finally, the health department money, we simply have to have money to respond to the pandemic, so that was also a good use. I would also add that part of the process, not the process, but part of the rules associated with this money is that there are specific things that the money can be spent on, and response to the pandemic is one of them. And so it fits into the primary rules and processes for that money, which is we needed to do it anyway, but it's just an interesting aside, I think.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shea, did you have anything to add? Do you have a
briefly,
minute?
yes. I wanted to, maybe we could expand on that restaurant project because I know it helped businesses, but also I understand that once it went live, it was out quickly.
Yeah.
So perhaps another round would be, for the community, would be a beneficial thing.
Well, I think we can agree on that.
So before turning to Mr. Boyer, who may have some more COVID-related questions, we do want to just remind viewers what they're watching. This is the third in a series of candidate forums that we're being brought to you by Cayuga Community College, and the Citizen. We are with the candidates for the 7th Legislative District, which includes the towns of Scipio, Springport, and Ledyard. We have in the studio today Legislator Keith Batman, who is on the Democratic and Working Families line, and Robert Shea, who is on the Republican and Independent line. On the phone with us is Jeremy Boyer, the executive editor of The Citizen, who's asking questions of both of our candidates. Mr. Boyer, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, the next question I wanted to talk about was efforts to get Cayuga County residents vaccinated, and certainly in some of the rural areas in the county, it's been more of a struggle to get those rates up. And as legislators, you have a role, I guess, in supporting and amplifying the Cayuga County Health Department's efforts to promote the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine. So I guess I'd like to get a real basic answer as to whether you support those efforts. Do you believe that the vaccine is something that we as a government should be encouraging as many people to get as possible? And then explain why or why not.
Okay, I think we're up first with Legislator Batman. You have 2 minutes on this issue of the vaccines.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, to answer the question, yes. I think we should do everything we can to encourage people to get vaccinated, and I think we should do everything we can to encourage people to stay masked and distanced when they're in any situation in which they may contract or pass the disease. As you may know, I had COVID early on, and I'll tell you, it is a ugly, ugly disease. I obviously didn't die, but I was sicker than I've ever been, and I don't wish it on anyone. And so we need to do something to make certain we stop the pandemic and the spread of this disease. What we can do, I absolutely support the health department. As I mentioned, I think in passing, I'm president of the Board of Health. So obviously, I have a dual role here as president of the Board of Health and as a member of the Board of Health, intimately involved in these efforts. And then as a legislator, I have a different hat, but also intimately involved in these efforts. The problem we're having at this point is the people that are resistant to the vaccination, and it's an ongoing struggle. It's a struggle here. It's a struggle lots of places. We don't have a solution at this point. If we had one, I would be here saying the solution is, and I would be advocating for that. I think we need to stay at it. We need to keep on it. And we need to encourage everyone, and I encourage anyone listening to this, to go out, if you haven't done so, and get vaccinated. You're doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for me. You're doing it for my grandchildren who are too young to get vaccinated. You're doing it for your neighbors. You're doing it for your neighbors' children. You're doing it for the community. It's not a political issue. It's a health issue, and it's an important one.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shea, on this issue of vaccinations and the role of county in dealing with the issue of vaccination.
Yes, I mean, I think it's a good thing to support our health department. That they did a great job with contact tracing. I was a person that was contacted for 10 days when I went to Florida and came back. The person I went down with was an essential employee. They went to work, and I was quarantined. So, I think there's a consistency problem here with the information. I think we need better information from our state and federal government. I'm against the mandating it. I think obviously one thing about COVID that it did bring is personal hygiene. Masking if you don't feel good. That's good practice anyway. Washing your hands frequently. So I also had COVID and was sick, even though I got the shot. So it's, I got the shingle shot and I got shingles. So I mean, it's really crazy, but I think good health practices is good for everybody, whether you're out or in. But I think staying home and taking care of your health is paramount. And I think it needs to be an individual decision between you and your doctor. That's good advice for anybody, and the medical professionals know.
Mr. Batman, you have 1 minute on this.
Well, it's just I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to do this or not, but I'm interested. Ms. Shea indicated we needed more data. I don't know what more data we need. We know that this is a disease that spreads very easily, very quickly to multiple people. We know it's a disease that makes people very ill and kills lots of people. We know that the vaccine is effective in at least, at the minimum, in reducing hospitalizations and deaths from that. And I'm just not sure what data. I've got all the data I need, is my point. This is a deadly data. I support measles, mumps, and rubella vaccinations. I support the fact that a Cayuga Community College student, for years and years and years, in order to attend this school and any college and any public school in the United States of America had to get, in New York State, had to get mumps, measles, and rubella. I'm not sure what other data we need. We just have to act.
Okay. Mr. Boyer only gets to ask the questions. I don't even get to ask questions. If Mr. Shea would like a minute to talk about that, that's his choice. But candidates don't get to ask questions. of each
Fair
other.
enough.
Okay. I didn't cover all of the rules, apparently. That was one of them. So, Mr. Shea, you have a minute if you'd like to talk about the data issue.
Well, I briefly touched on it. I mean, between non-essential and essential employees is two people going to the same state, which at the time was Florida, a hotspot, would come back and one would quarantine and one would not. I mean, that's not consistent. And first you can get the COVID virus from touching surfaces. That was disputed. So, I mean, and again, not to go off tangent, but there's our open borders. I mean, there's people that need to be vetted, and shouldn't they be given the vaccine as well? And I mean, the consistency, and I believe Cayuga County is still down around 50% vaccinated. So there's an issue there, and I think that needs to be addressed.
Mr. Boyer.
I think I heard Mr. Shea touch on this, so I think I know what his answer would be, but maybe he can elaborate. And then it's really a question for both candidates anyway. But I did want to ask about the idea of mandating county government vaccinations. There have been some governments that have done a mandate. If you want to continue to work, you have to get vaccinated. In some cases, there's an option to have regular testing. If you won't get vaccinated, you would have to be tested on a regular schedule. What are your thoughts, either of you, on implementing something like that for county government workforce, which is several hundred people?
Mr. Shea, you happen to be up first for this question anyway, so you have
Okay.
2 minutes on this issue.
Great. Again, I think it's a personal choice between you and your doctor. I know early on when this pandemic first came out, our healthcare workers went to battle right for the front lines before the vaccine was distributed in its abundance. So they were first-hand responders on treating this vaccine before, and now it seems like they're being victims of mandates, which I don't agree with. I think it's something that we have to handle, as I said, responsibly, between personal choice between us and our doctors.
Legislator, you have 2 minutes on this issue of mandating the vaccine for employees.
Well, I think the issue of mandating vaccine for county employees is really a two-part. One is just the idea of the mandate, which I won't get into right now. But the other issue is the fact that it's a county employee, and there are a couple of issues here that we have to pay attention to. One is the two organizations that control employment in public sector are PERB and PESH. PESH is OSHA. PERB is the equivalent of the National Labor Relations Standards Board. So these control the relationship between employees, safety, as well as the relationships with union. It's my personal position that any time you're going to require anyone in a workforce to do anything, that you need to involve the people that you're mandating in that discussion. In this case, that means unions, because we're in a unionized environment. I'm opposed to any mandate, any action that does not involve the union. When Cayuga County, in our chair, required people the employees in the county to wear masks, the first step was to sit down with the union and say, what do you want? And the union, in fact, wanted a mask mandate. And you go from there. I think that conversation is absolutely important. I do not think it's a matter between me and my doctor. This is a serious disease that is easily passed on, just as I go back to the mumps, measles, rubella. These diseases have been historically controlled because we put in place practices and vaccinations that work, and we need to get this under control. That's probably my time, but so I won't touch the mandate part.
I'm good.
All right, Mr. Boyer.
All right. Another topic I wanted to get to today is Cayuga County's leadership structure and the question of what the long-term structure should be. For about a decade, Cayuga County had an appointed administrator, an administrator that was appointed by the legislature who was supposed to handle day-to-day running of the government. There was a lot of turnover in that position, and so in 2019, when the most recent office holder of that position was terminated, the legislature chose not to fill that or do a search to replace that position, but instead look at the long-term structure of what to do. So that's a big question for probably going to be for the next legislature is, should we be moving toward a different form, such as county executive, which is an elected position, or go back to the appointed administrator with some changes perhaps, or even stick with the form that was in Cayuga County for a long time before, and that was having the chair of the legislature be the person that is the day-to-day leader. So I'd like to hear each of you your thoughts on which structure you prefer and why.
Legislator, you'll have 2 minutes on this issue of structure at county government.
Yeah, it's a real question that we all are struggling with and must struggle with. And you're right, it goes back more than a decade, but it goes back before me when we put in place this administrative structure, and it's never worked very well. The problem we're having at this point, I think, is Einstein, to paraphrase him, said insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, this is us. We've attempted this time and again. If you attempt something that doesn't work once, well, who knows? You do it twice, it doesn't work, bad luck. You do it 3 or 4 or 5 times and it doesn't work, there's something wrong. And that's where we are at this point. The legislature, and this is not the current legislature, it goes back to several legislators, several election cycles, has been unable to resolve this issue, unable to come to an agreement about what we should do. I conclude from that we're not capable of deciding what we need to do. We need help. And it's a foolish person when they need help who does not seek it out. That's what I think we need to do. I think we need to go to the community. We need to get other people involved. We need perhaps to get someone to come in and facilitate. That I haven't thought it through enough to know, but we need to reach out to others to help us work through this and present a recommendation. Form of government, how we're going to do it, what we should do, and then see if the legislature is willing to act upon that, understanding the full complexities of the issues.
Thank you, Legislator. Mr. Shea, you have 2 minutes on this issue of the structure of county government.
Thank you. Yes, I know we're paying several $100,000s to those who are not working as former administrators, and we can't afford to be doing that. What we should do, I agree with Mr. Batman, Legislator Batman, is we need to find out all there is to try the county executive, see what works, see what doesn't work. Put it before a referendum for the people, and have the county executive accountable to the voters. I think, and that gets it away from the county legislature, and we can legislate instead of putting more burden on the chair as one. And I think the voters should decide.
Mr. Boyer, you have time for at least 2, maybe 3 more questions.
Okay. As a hopefully maybe a quick follow-up to that. Last week, the legislature and Mr. Batman was one of the people that voted in favor, voted to authorize the hiring of an operations officer at a pay of about $69,000 in order to provide more day-to-day leadership support for the county chairperson who has basically been filling in that administrative role. That's looking at as an interim measure ahead of whatever long-term decisions are made about it. but it was a divided vote. So I'd like to ask each to explain your thoughts on having this operations officer position on the payroll to be a top line leader for county government.
Mr. Shea, you'll go first on this issue of the Deputy Operations Director.
Well, to the county chair being in charge of the day-to-day operations or in needing help, it's a daunting task. You know, I don't have a problem with supporting her in her running of the county, but again, we're paying people that not to work. That shouldn't happen. So in the interim, I would support that, but the long term, I think we need to take a hard look and then stop creating more government and just get back to basics.
Legislator, your vote and your position on this issue of the Deputy Operations Director.
Yeah, and you know, frankly, you know, I thought about this a lot before the vote and in preparation for here today. And you know, frankly, I remain amazed that this is even an issue. You know, we all are involved in organizations. We belong to churches, civic organizations. So most of us had a job or interact with someone with a job. And so we all know that there's got to be someone at the top and that provides overall coordination, the leadership, analysis, brings everything together and makes things happen and looks to the future. So no one questions that. If we look around, think about the organizations that you belong to. Look around. Once an organization gets to a certain size, that person has to have support. They can't do it themselves. And that's what Mr. Shea is saying, and he's right. You can't do that yourself, and this is not temporary. You can't do it today, tomorrow, next week, or next decade. You have to have staff support to get the work done, and the work is important work. Cayuga County is a $150 million corporation, 700 full and part-time employees. You can't manage such an organization with one person working, probably the chair's working 50, 60, 70 hours a week. It can't be done. And so, of course, it has to be done. And I don't care what the form of government is. There will have to be people helping at the top. So, yes, I support it. I support it strongly.
Okay, Mr. Boyer, your next question.
Another big issue to tackle for the legislature that's sworn in on January 1st or 2nd, whatever day they do that, will be redistricting. We have new census numbers, and the ledge needs to make some decisions about how districts should be divided up. Should we draw new lines in order to try to balance out the weighted voting system that's in place right now? The other issue is the overall size of the legislature, being 15 districts. Is that a number that you think should change in any way? So I'd like to hear your thoughts on both those issues about whether there should be new lines and whether there should be any changes in the number of districts.
Legislator, I think you're up first for the first answer on this.
Okay, and let me take the size issue first, because that affects the lines. The size is something we absolutely need to look at and begin looking at now. I'm not sure 15 is the right number. I tend to think it's a few too many. There's been a lot of research on the best size for organizations, and 15 is not one of the numbers that generally emerges as a real workable number, unless you begin to do lots of other things, which we will not do because we have neither the money nor the will. So we need to talk about it. I don't have a number. I just know it's something that needs investigation, needs discussion. We got to make that decision. Once we make that decision, whether we stay at 15 or go smaller, we have to redistrict. We have to redistrict for a couple of reasons. One is our current districts are illegal. We're over over the number of people that the disparities between districts. So we have to fix that, even if we stay at 15. If we go less than 15, of course, then we'll have to redistrict in its entirety. We can't do this until the congressional districts are resolved, because there are complications if you begin to split up towns and voting districts. So we can move on the number now, but we can't redraw those districts until we know where the congressional districts are going to lie.
Thank you. Mr. Shea, on this issue of size and weighted voting.
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing issue, and I'm concerned about the weighted voting. For that reason, the size of the districts may change, the legislature may change accordingly. It all depends on what the redistricting recommends. Weighted voting, I'm concerned if those who are more rural have less of a weighted vote. Are they included in the negotiations? Do they have a say in what goes on, or do you just pair up with the ones who have a higher weighted voting? So I think weighted voting needs to be looked at. I'm not a fan at it, quite honestly, but I think one vote, one district is not a bad thing. I mean, we need to look at all of it.
Okay. Mr. Batman, you'll have 1 minute.
Yeah, if we can get to one person, one vote without weights, that's ideal. I would point out in our system, though, that that our district has the third highest weighted votes. So it's not a metropolitan, it's not a city rural thing. And in fact, the smallest districts are Auburn. They have the smallest weighted votes at this point. So they could make the case that they're underrepresented, I guess. But yeah, it can't go on. It just can't. It's got to be fixed.
Okay, Mr. Boyer, you're down to your last question.
All right. Well, I'll ask this question, and it's kind of an individual question for both along the same lines, but each kind of looks at it in a different way. And that is the question of elected government experience. Mr. Shea, I know you mentioned a couple of years on a town board.
Yes.
And Mr. Batman, of course, is looking for his third term here on county board, as well as several years elected in the town of Scipio, and then several years in school board. So, the question for Mr. Shea would be, what do you say to voters who are concerned that your opponent has much more experience in government and elected office than you do? For Mr. Batman, the flip side is, what do you say to voters who think you held elected office long enough, and part of what we all need sometimes is some fresh voices and fresh perspectives? So I'd like to each kind of dive into that topic in answering that question.
So because it happens to be your time and it makes it equal, you're going to get the first answer on this question, Mr. Shea, and then we'll have Mr. Batman on this issue of experience.
Okay. My experience or inexperience, I don't think has anything to do with it. It's about getting in office, getting the facts, and making good decisions, thereby showing leadership. And I think that's one of the things I've learned over the years of my experience, not just from being on a town board for a couple of years, but actually going through life experiences and learning, being in charge of putting up structures, commercial buildings. I had to make some decisions then. I had to stick by it. I also had to rally a team so that we're all on the same page, so we can get the goal done, the project done in a timely manner. I know Mr. Batman probably has never built a commercial building, but it's something that requires just a little bit of knowledge, and you have to get a team together. And that's what I would do being in the legislature. I'm at a grave disadvantage here, not knowing all the ins and outs of the issues. That does not mean I wouldn't work my butt off just to find out what's going on, what the issues are, and come to the best resolution for the voters.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Shea. Mr. Batman, on this issue of experience.
Yeah, of course it's something people talk about, but they talk about it not in the context of the Cayuga County Legislature as much as they do about professional politicians. I'm not a professional politician. Mr. Shea is not a professional politician. I retired from the Cayuga Community College and Empire State College, where I spent a number of years, and then I talked about the other things I've done. I've always had jobs, and all of my political work and my volunteer work in community organizations has been just that. It's been volunteer on the side and not my career. The experience, there's no substitute for experience. We know that, and we say that in other contexts. If we're looking for someone to do something with us, we don't say, let's get someone who's never done this. Let's get someone who doesn't know anything about it, because surely they can learn. No, what you do is you get someone who has built a foundation so that their ability to learn the new nuances of the position are increased. You know, I agree that teamwork's important. I agree that building things are important. I built many programs when I was dean at the community college, both some physical but mostly programmatic. I understand how to do that stuff, and it is important. It is helpful. But the experience of being an elected official, understanding working with towns, villages, constituents, and other legislators is priceless.
Yes,
You'll have 1 minute.
1 minute, okay. Yes, as I mentioned, Mr. Boyer, earlier, that I am a proud alumni of Cayuga Community College, and that wasn't all that long ago, like 4 or 5 years ago. So I just want to dispute that fact that you can teach an old dog new tricks.
Just
You
to
have,
clarify,
one-
I never talk to anybody about being old. I agree with that. You sure can.
So, gentlemen, thank you for answering Mr. Boyer's questions. Mr. Boyer, as usual, thank you for your thoughtful questions. I know you'll be back in the studio in another week and a half with our 11th District Forum with Mr. Campanella and Elaine Daly, who's the incumbent, who's seeking re-election. But we want to thank you again for your questions today.
No
And now
problem.
we'll turn to closing statements. And as we said at the beginning, we'll go in reverse order. So, Mr. Shea, who is on the Republican and Independent lines, you have 2 minutes.
Well, it probably won't take 2 minutes, but as you heard, there are some differences between myself and Mr. Batman. And there was issues that I'd like to address being on the legislature, working hard, and I'd like to address business growth and bringing some new and energy-filled leadership to the legislature, being able to work with others and come to resolutions for the benefit of the county. I have much to learn, no doubt. I'll just say it right here, right now. But I'm willing to get in there and fight hard and work hard, and that's what it's going to take. I'd like to thank the people I've been in contact with in the towns of Scipio, Ledyard, and Union Springs, and Aurora. I'd like to ask you for your vote on November the 2nd. Please support me, and we'll try to get some things done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shea. We'll now turn to Legislator Keith Batman, who's on the Democratic and Working Families lines. Legislator, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Well, I'll try not to take 2 minutes as well. But I just want to start to thank Mr. Costantino and Mr. Boyer for the opportunity to come here today and discuss these issues, and also to thank the students and Cayuga Community College for the media and the ability to get this out so that people can actually see it. You know, we've spoken of a number of issues today, and I've appreciated the opportunity to explore some of them. I think it was a good discussion. The bottom line, though, is my depth and breadth of experience and my record of success. These give me the ability to not only hit the ground running, but to work with my caucus and my fellow legislators to see through the challenging projects that lie in front of us. I built deep connections with the villages and towns and constituents and businesses in the District 7, excuse me, and together I think we can build better infrastructure, better environment, healthier economy with good jobs. I consider myself very fortunate to bring both experience and educational background that has made my work as a legislator such a great fit for me, and I think a very good fit for my constituents. My work's not done, and I look forward to in the next term serving District 7 in Cayuga County, and I appreciate your vote.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for being here and helping our students with their coursework, because that's why we do this here, in part as well as a public service to the community. And thank you for running for office, not always an easy task for you and your loved ones. So we thank you for doing that. We also want to thank you who are out there listening or watching these forums, and thank you for taking the time to listen to our candidates and to hear what they have to talk about, and make sure that you go out there and vote on November 2nd, or if you choose to do early voting, which is about a week and a half earlier than that, please do so. A couple of programming notes. Mr. Boyer is off this Thursday. When we come back, we will have two groups of, two different types of candidate shows. The first one is a interview with Geraldine Germano-Yaw, who is running for the 9th Legislative District, which includes the towns of, includes Moravia, Niles, Sempronius, and Summerhill. She will be in here with a one-on-one interview. Her opponent, Mr. Strong, who was appointed to fill the vacancy left by Charles Ripley when he resigned about a year ago, has declined his chance to be part of the forum, and as our past rules have allowed, we do a one-on-one interview with those candidates who do accept. And so she will be here. She is on the Democratic and Working Families lines. That will be followed by both candidates for surrogate judge have agreed to participate in presenting their credentials right after that on Thursday. John Budelman, who's on the Republican and Conservative lines, and Ben Sussman, who's on the Democratic and Working Family lines, will be in the studio to give 5-minute presentations on their credentials. They are running for a seat being vacated by Mark H. Fandrick, who has decided not to seek a third 10-year term. As I mentioned, we have other forums scheduled. We'll be back next Thursday with the 11th District, which is in the city of Auburn, one of 3 in the city of Auburn that have competitive races this time. Mario Campanella, who is on the Republican line, is challenging incumbent Democrat Elaine Daly, and that will be next Thursday, the 11th, and then we'll do the following week, the 13th and 15th legislative districts, and then we will end our biannual city council, our biannual forums with our city council forum on October 26th. Because of the number of forums we have this year, the Citizen has these forums on their website, auburnpub.com, or you can go to the college's website and look at Cayuga Media and watch them there. Until Thursday, I'm Guy Cosentino for Cayuga Community College. We want to thank you for joining us today. Be healthy, be well, be safe, and we will see you back here in the studio on Thursday. So just remember you're on television just for another minute.